And Craig, it's all yours.
Oh, thanks, Howard. And I wish I could see everybody at least in person. It makes it a little more, I think, rewarding when we can see each other. And I just want to start off by saying, like, I hope everybody's healthy. I can appreciate the disruption you guys have. I just couldn't imagine being in college right now, having a door being sent home. If you're a senior, what that experience is like. And I hope that, you're all healthy and that your families are doing well. We know with a lot of the economic problems, especially with Pennsylvania, hopefully your families are doing well despite all of this. And I do recognize and appreciate that I'm taking a big chunk of your time, and that I totally would be available after this this session. You can contact me through Howard. He has my email address, and I'm happy to guide you. And one of those reasons is I'm from rural Pennsylvania. I'm from Lebanon, Pennsylvania. And in my family, I didn't have anybody that graduated from college. I had nobody to kind of walk me through the experience of what college was like. I wanted to go to college primarily because I wanted to join the Army and get commissioned as an officer. And that's what I did. I went to Pitt and I graduated in 1992. I never met anyone from the FBI. It was, I might as well met someone from the moon. I mean, it was what we saw on television. And so I do appreciate people that maybe are from more remote parts of any part of the country that just never get to meet someone. So I try to be gracious with my time and help people that are interested, and not let it be some remote possibility that you don't think you ever have a shot at, because you do. If you follow the right path, then you're in college and you have a shot at it. And so I graduated college from Pittsburgh in 1992, and I got commissioned as an Army officer, and I was in for 4 years. And towards the end of my assignment, my commander just told me one day, "Hey, you have to cover for me. I'm going for an interview." I thought, what? Who goes on an interview in the Army? And he didn't tell me what he was doing until he came back. And he said, "Hey, I had an interview with the FBI." And my first thought was, well, if he could do it, I could do it. So that began a mass exodus at the time in the mid-90s, when myself and two of my other fellow officers decided to apply for, and we got accepted into the FBI. So, and I don't want this to be a plug just for the FBI. I think I would offer that you guys consider maybe not just law enforcement, but also other intelligence agencies, the military, any of the federal government. I think it's gotten, especially we in the FBI have gotten a lot of bad press in the last several years. I escaped the United States just in time before or just after the election. And we had, justifiably in some areas, a really bloody nose and some black eyes over some of the things that happened over the last few years. But by and large, it is a rewarding profession. It is one that we're not subject to the volatility of the market. You won't get rich, but it is a very rewarding experience, and it does have tremendous benefits. I think in the light of this, we've endured a couple government shutdowns, and we thought that was miserable at the time. But I really feel for people now that are suffering because of Corona and the job market and circumstances beyond their control. They just found themselves without work or the ability to even go outside in many instances. So what I want to kind of show you guys is, in my experience at Pittsburgh, I remember they had a table for CIA, and I think it was NSA, and I approached it, and they were just looking for electrical engineers and people that had 3.5 grade point averages. And I just felt this exclusion that it wasn't even an option for me. And at the time, I thought that I could never join the federal government. And I just didn't meet anybody at the time that could kind of walk me through the process. So that's kind of what my goal is today, is to kind of give you an overview, if you're interested, from my perspective, of how you could kind of make that approach and go at it. So depending on what you want to do, there's a site called FBI Jobs, and I have that up in front of you now. And one of the best things we've started offering in the last 5 years is an internship program. So if you're a freshman or a sophomore, it's fairly competitive, but you can come to the site and apply for FBI internships. And the value of that is you can spend a summer in an FBI office. It's a paid internship. You have to get a security background, and that gives you a leg up if you want to become a full-time employee, because they do tend to extend job offers to interns with the FBI upon graduation. Now, that would be for a special agent. That might be for an analyst position, or what we call a staff operations specialist, someone who does a lot of tactical research and records checks in our investigations. And if you ever have a chance to look at this site, it's gotten much better compared to my experience when you had to write a letter and wait for a letter to come back to you, and you had to send this correspondence back and forth by the mail and fax. You can see that there's a career path. Can everybody see this, Howard? Can you?
Yes, I can see it, and I think everybody else can see it too. So you're all good.
Yeah. So from the perspective, so keep in mind, I'm here for the FBI, but there's Homeland Security investigations. There's the Drug Enforcement Administration. There's Secret Service. There's the United States Postal Inspection Service. They're all, from the standpoint of a federal agent in the United States, if you're a federal agent, you have what's called, you're designated an 1811. That's the job band for a federal agent. That's just the title. You're a federal law enforcement officer. You can be with any agency, but you have pretty much, you're able to carry a weapon. You have arrest powers. Now the violations you investigate may differ, but that's kind of what we are. So starting from the top, if you see on the FBI jobs, because I am sensitive sometimes, the agents come out to schools and they only give the impression that the agent is the only job available in the FBI. It tends to be one that's probably more latitude, and it can be a little more exciting. But if you want something more strategic, or you like the analytical side of it, there's intelligence analysts. We have surveillance specialists, and you can see those are the types of jobs that we hire for. So I will just start with agents, because when I started maybe we'll have to watch this, but let's see, we'll go down here. But when we started, in the middle of the screen, you can see these are kind of the skills that we look for. And traditionally it's been, are you an accountant? Are you an attorney? Are you a linguist of some kind? You have a special language that's in demand? Or we had a diversified, which was pretty much everyone else. And the FBI draws heavily from law enforcement and the military, because they have clean backgrounds. They tend to have either a security clearance already. They don't have any arrest records. It's an easy hire in some cases. You're not getting maybe a crazy skill, but you're getting someone who's a known entity. And on the screen in front of you, you can kind of see some of the options. To be an agent, you have to be 23 years old at the youngest, or 24 at the youngest, and you have to have 3 years of professional experience, and it could be anything. And when we go out to colleges in my previous assignment, everybody tell me, I'm going to be a criminal justice major. I'm going to be a criminal justice major. That's not bad, but you have to have the experience on top of that. So that means you're not going to go right into the FBI. You may have to be a police officer somewhere, or people do join the military. And I tell people, just have a healthy understanding that you need that experience. And if you don't want to be a police officer in third shift, or it's not for you, I would tell people, pursue what you're passionate about and what you want to do, and do it well, and then come to the FBI or come to another federal agency. But these, on this list of skills I'm showing you right now, if you have any kind of cybersecurity or IT background, you can pretty much go wherever you want. That's just one of the realities now, is that hard cyber skills are sought after by everybody. But there are other options. If you're in the healthcare sector, we do have a lot of fraud that we need people that have that experience. Any kind of psychology or counseling, and don't you see accounting, and it's not sexy, but those are skills that we have to grind through to make our cases. And it's not always just chasing fugitives or things like that. And so that's kind of the background. And there's a testing phase you have to go through. So the first step, if you're ever interested, you just come to the site and you look at some of the things that you need to know to apply. You can't have ever been convicted of a felony. That holds for most law enforcement agencies, and that's anything that's punishable by over more than a year in jail. Drug use is scrutinized fairly heavily, but there is a grace period that if you have that in your history, it's not a deal breaker. It's just harder drugs, that's that you don't have as much leg to negotiate. But things like marijuana or prescription drugs, if you've not used those for a period of 3 to 5 years, that allows you to go ahead and proceed. And does the FBI look for more people with a master's degree? Not necessarily, unless it's if you have a undergraduate with 3 years of desired work experience. It doesn't offer any additional points, no additional pay. You are equal to everyone else. So with the hiring process, one of the best things is to do is just to kind of call up the recruiter at your local field office. I highly encourage that because we've gotten much better. It used to be like, we could have 10,000 applicants and we didn't have to talk to them because they're going to continue to come. But we've gotten more deliberate and engaging. So if you say, for example, I've processed through Philadelphia. If you called them today and say, I want to speak to the applicant recruiter and just ask about options for internship programs or how do I get started, they should engage you and tell you realistically where you stand. And if you do meet all the criteria, they'll invite you to take what's called a phase 1 test. And that's more of a psychological profile. It's a weird math skills and your interpretation of different patterns. And it's kind of weeding out people that maybe on the outer limits of they do have some judgment questions about how aggressive you would be if you had authority. And most, I don't know what the pass fail rate is, but there's a good sample test under that, under the testing overview on this page. And if you pass that, and they still need to continue to hire people, they may have 50 candidates and they say, we need 5 people with hard cyber skills. We need 5 maybe Russian speakers. And then we need to fill these others. They'll go down and look and see who's ready to go. And they'll invite you back for a phase 2 interview. And it would be unlike any interview you've ever had because it's made to be very, they don't want to show any favoritism to you. So it's just asking you questions about giving you a lot of feedback, and you have to give examples of where you've overcome adversity or you've shown some initiative, and they'll help you prepare for that phase 2. And even if you pass that, then you have to go through the portions of the physical fitness. You have to go through a security background. You have to have a polygraph, and then you have to wait for a slot to open up the academy. And then you go, and it's a 19-week program. And currently they sent a lot of people home because of the COVID-19 concerns. So unfortunately for people that were in the academy, they've got to wait and hit the pause button for an indeterminate period of time. And so the academy is not, I think comparing to the military, it wasn't bad. They want you to succeed and pass. And when you're done after 19 weeks, at a point during that, usually in the first 6 to 8 weeks, they tell you where you're going to go. You can say, I want to go to Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, but they have 56 field offices to staff and their needs trump yours. So if they align, great, but generally it's going to be, I tell people if they were to send you to your worst city, like Anchorage, or mine, it was Newark. I thought if I'm going to go to Newark, I might as well go to New York City. And so I got New York City, but that's caused some people to really think hard at the academy, and they've resigned. There's been divorces or things like that. So if you go into it as a married person or you have some type of attachment or your family, you really got to consider you could be sent anywhere and you could get back, but it could be disruptive for you. So I tell people going into it, how badly do you want this job and can you endure some of the changes it's going to implement in your life? In my experience, I went to New York right away. I was single. To me, it wasn't as disruptive, and I was in my mid-20s, so I was very excited to go there. And I hit it at a time when Al-Qaeda was very active, and there were bombings in foreign countries, and 9/11 happened, and we traveled extensively overseas, which was very rare at the time. And I had gotten married and had young children, and I didn't enjoy being away for months at a time. And that's where I asked my wife, hey, let's consider an assignment overseas. And she wasn't really excited about it, but we had 2 kids, and she said, hey, if you agree to a 3rd child, I'll go overseas. And I said, deal. And so within about a year, we had our 3rd child, and within 2, we were in Berlin, Germany. And so there are a lot of opportunities with the FBI. So there is a loan repayment program. So if you have a lot of student debt, they'll pay, if you qualify and you have to apply every year, they'll pay off portions of your student debt. You can obtain a master's degree and they'll pay up to $40,000 towards your master's degree. I got my MBA through Xavier University and they paid for 2/3 of it. They'll send you to a language school. You can change mid-career. So if you're a cyber person and you want to work white collar crime or terrorism, after your initial years, there's ability for you to move over, and even with experience, the right skill, move to other parts in the United States. So there is some flexibility there. That's probably an advantage as opposed to the disadvantage of they may transfer you at their need. I don't consider it, in my experience, to be a extremely dangerous job. I think police, I can never say that I have a dangerous job when I look at what police officers do. We've done a lot of, I arrived in outside Cincinnati in 2011, just as the heroin epidemic was going out of control. We were there for 5 years and we had some pretty, it was just a frustrating time because the epidemic was out of control and we were just trying to find out ways to reduce the harm in the communities, and working with healthcare providers and law enforcement and just everyone we could to kind of mitigate. And I know it hit Pennsylvania pretty hard, and Pittsburgh and in West Virginia, and we battled it a lot in Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati. So it was rewarding for me in that I got to learn a lot of the community. I got back in touch after being overseas quite a bit. And so I think at some point, I'm towards the end of my career. I can retire the end of this year, but I could stay 7 more years. So that's kind of, if it offers me things I find intriguing. But I do like to talk to people who are interested, because I know it's time for me to kind of pass the torch to people and get good people to come in and tell them the value of joining the FBI. And I think that's where I like to be generous with my time and answering questions. I hope it wasn't a waste for you guys, but I think I've taken up a good 20 minutes. So Howard, if you'd like me to cover something specifically, or I could start with a few questions, I can cover a lot of ground.
While the questions come in, and everybody feel free to use the Q&A to ask some questions. Craig can see them on his screen, so he can answer them directly without me filtering them, but I'll help him as well in case a bunch start coming in. But maybe you could just talk a little bit, because I know we might have some people who are listening, participating in this, who are thinking about going into intelligence or counterterrorism specifically. Yep. And you did that. I know one of your first assignments was to go to Africa for the embassy bombing. Yep. And you were in New York on your way, as I said, to the office when the attacks happened on 9/11. So maybe if you could describe that, because it's not so common that we have people who've done counterterrorism work come and talk to us at Penn State. So if you can talk a little bit about that.
And without getting into like big storytelling sessions, I mean, think of, if you're from, I don't know how many, everyone out there is from like rural Pennsylvania. I mean, I didn't travel overseas. I think I went to London when I was 25, and that was a short trip. And when I got to New York, many agents wanted to do the traditional organized crime work with the Italian organized crime, with fugitives. It was, you're doing the fun things that people like to do as young agents, to get out in the street and arrest people. And I said, I kind of wanted to go to the international terrorism side because that attracted me. And I think my timing was good or bad, because within several months of getting onto the squad I was on, the Al-Qaeda bombed the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. So they attacked suicide bombings of both embassies, and they killed over 200 people. And that was the first time, there was an attack in Saudi Arabia several years before, but this is the first one where they directly attacked embassies. And so supervisors just walked through our office and kind of said, you, go get your passport. You're going to go to Africa. What? So you had to get a series of shots, and they just launched us on a military plane into Nairobi, Kenya. And there were people on the ground that kind of paired you up, but your job was to go out and find eyewitnesses, go try to find out. Find eyewitnesses, try to find people that had rented the vehicle. There was a bomb truck. There were modifications made. They used explosives. They used oxygen tanks, all that on the truck. It took time and energy and money to prepare. So we knew if we could find eyewitnesses that were around when these trucks had been purchased, they'd use cell phones. We got the cell phone records. We tried to kind of piece this whole thing together, which we were eventually able to do. And we took all the evidence back to New York with us. And that's when we issued the first they called it the Bin Laden Indictment against some senior members of Al-Qaeda and also against the people on the ground that helped prepare and actually execute the attack of the embassies. And about a year and a half later, there was a Navy destroyer called the USS Cole. Al-Qaeda had planned and executed an attack against a US destroyer just off the port of Aden and killed 20 sailors or 19 sailors. And that was just another plot by the same organization. So again, as we investigated that, we got into the upper levels of Al-Qaeda and we started to see some of the more senior members were responsible for the planning of both those attacks. And lo and behold, in the summer of 2001, we start seeing a lot of counterintelligence intercepts on, it was called FISA. You might know that from the news today, but NSA, CIA, FBI were collecting data from wiretaps of senior members of Al-Qaeda. And they didn't say openly, hey, we're going to conduct an attack in New York. It was all a lot of coded correspondence at the time where they used words like honey and weddings and falcons and just through experience, you knew they were kind of talking around certain operations, but you weren't sure exactly what was going on. And at the time, there was a big rift in the US government about what intelligence could be shared openly with even other investigators in New York. And so you had half the squad seeing information that the other side couldn't. And this was a big debate in the summer of 2001. And when 9/11 happened, they basically afterwards said, the gloves are off, you guys can share whatever you need to share. And I was in New York on 9/11. And so we got pretty close to the Trade Center and it was just surreal. And what happened when the first tower came down is we kind of just laid on the floor of the building we were in on Church Street. And after all the noise was over, we kind of stood up and said, what just happened? And we had to count heads to see if we had everybody. We made our way back to our old building on 26 Federal Plaza. And we had phones called Nextels at the time, kind of push to talk phones, and they didn't function. So we couldn't find where everybody was. We still had people missing. And then in the middle of this discussion, the second tower came down and we moved further away. And this was, our office it wasn't destroyed, but we had no communication. And so we had to go to a third location, which was our garage. And we kind of came up with a plan of how we were going to start setting out shifts and working to kind of see what was going on. But within days after 9/11 attacks, I mean, there was still the belief that we would find survivors or that we would be able to find the black box from the plane near the Trade Center site. But over a number of days, we started getting the manifests over the planes, and it became pretty clear who were on those planes and what their ties were back to Al-Qaeda. So then the invasion of Afghanistan started, and we moved a lot of elements forward to Afghanistan. So I'd spent some time in Afghanistan. Those people got sent to a lot of people got sent to Guantanamo Bay. So you kind of see how this thing's starting to morph into a larger U.S. effort. The Gulf War, the second Gulf War, the invasion of Iraq happened in 2003, and the fight of terrorism just really changed over time. So in the late 1990s, they used certain landlines or cards, but pagers were still popular. The cell phones really didn't become a thing until the early mid 2000s. And there were, an email started to get more popular, but in the mid 2000s, ISIS started to arise. So we started having issues with ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, where so we had these issues that were based in Yemen as well as Afghanistan and Iraq. And by 2010, 2011, when Osama bin Laden was killed, terrorism has just continued to evolve and change. And I think for me, and what's interesting for you guys, is the technology. With Edward Snowden, if you remember him, from probably the late 2000s, 2009, 2010, 2011, he turned over a lot of data to WikiLeaks, and it went out into the world, and that was the biggest loss of data the U.S. government's really ever suffered. And he used the technology that he used and the way it was able to be dispersed through Wikipedia. But based on his actions, telecommunications providers and manufacturers like Apple said, you know what? Because the US government was collecting so much, we're just going to encrypt everything end to end. We don't have the keys. We don't have the ability to decrypt. So that was in response. So terrorists have begun using, or were using at that time, a lot of encrypted platforms. And so to this day, it's been very challenging, even for us in matters of child pornography. There's some very sophisticated users with virtual private networks, with virtual private networks, encrypted applications. These things are very difficult to penetrate. So I got a question. So the answer was, what's the typical age when people are accepted in the FBI? I would say, I think what I've seen is 33 is what 30 to 33 when people tend to get in. So that's kind of been the evolution to where ISIS, once ISIS has kind of been, with the ISIS elements in Syria had been reduced, we kind of moved on into the election of 2016 when the greater emphasis was placed on Russian involvement in election and some of their trolling, and it was going on. So terrorism's kind of, you've got this shift where traditional terrorism's kind of gone down. Russian state activity is risen. And that's something that's of interest again with oligarchs and how Russia tends to get involved in activities in the US. So you shifted more from a counterterrorism to a counter-intelligence role. The question is, what kind of jobs? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you want to do that, just start maybe from the top and work your way down, if that works for you.
Yeah, and so what kind of jobs count as field experience that is needed before applying to the FBI? And I tell people it evolves. I think for a time, the military and law enforcement was the safe answer, but the problem is we always struggle to achieve diversity. So I think we're trying to look for more diverse backgrounds with people from, I would not say that computer science that's the shiny object now. 10 years ago, it was Arabic speakers. Russian speakers are always desired, but I think people from like the healthcare industry and lawyers and accountants, those have been like the core group of people for the last 20 years. Now the problem with being a lawyer is you have to go to law school. So I tell people, don't get a law degree just because you want to join the FBI. Get a law degree because you want to be a lawyer. Or you get an accounting degree because you want to be an accountant. So I don't know that helps, but it's of that core group that I have up there. Anybody, I've met people that we have a woman who was a Hollywood producer. We've had, I can't remember his name, but an NFL player from the Chicago Bears just became an FBI agent in the last 2 years. He was a safety or a cornerback for the Bears. So we have a few former NFL players that have joined too. So I would say there's no group that I would rule out for the most part that could join. Maybe a professional golfer or something like that. But did I get paid more when you moved overseas as an agent? I would say no, but there is the huge benefit of moving overseas is that when you go overseas as an FBI agent on a permanent assignment like mine, the State Department assumes all the costs for your housing. They don't pay any rent. They pay for the full tuition for each child to go to an international school, which are very expensive. So you end up saving a lot more money moving overseas because they do recognize the hardship. So you do make more just by the fact that you're not paying for any kind of housing costs while you're over here. Psychology-related jobs in the FBI, I think they are limited because we have the one that's a non-agent job is a victim assistance. That's a very important job that I think is underappreciated. So if you're a victim of a violent crime or an act of terrorism, we have people that have to guide those families through the whole process of what are your rights. As a federal law, you're entitled to certain rights, to know details about court cases. You might qualify for certain types of reimbursement or coverage for being a victim. So we have victims, so they have to have more of a knowledge of the psychology of the victim. There is training for that. I think we hear a lot of people want to be like a profiler. That's a very small sub-element in the FBI. I don't know that there's more than 10 or 15 people that do that kind of work, and they are advanced PhDs. And so it tends to be a very niche occupation that gets a lot of attention outside the FBI.
If I could just add, Frank Marsh, who will be talking next Tuesday, is an instructor at the FBI Academy, and he works with the behavioral science unit. He's a communications analyst expert. So if you're whoever asked that question, if you're interested, come back next Tuesday also, and maybe Frank can answer it as well.
Yeah, the next question is I got someone from saying they graduate early and they're planning to attend law school, but by the time they get out, they'll still be under 23. Is there any tips for someone who's interested in wanting to be in the FBI but still under the age requirement? There are tips. You can take on a different job that I outlined, such as a staff operations specialist or an intelligence analyst, or those are some of the non-agent roles. If you could get hired there, you could work for a period of a year or two and then apply to be an agent while you're in the FBI. So all that time that you have, if you weren't an agent, still applies towards your federal service. So those are the types of jobs that really the only ones available if you're under the age requirement for an agent. Am I able to spend a lot of time with my family? Yeah, especially now. So we're doing a lot of working from home, but I think, yes, it's a balance that you make it. They've gotten very good in the last 10 years of having a work-life balance. They realize there's no value in chaining you to a desk and making you work 14, 15 hours and then sending you home because you just can't sustain it. It's not possible. After 9/11, people tried to work a month, 2 months, 3 months, and it's just a recipe for disaster for you personally, physically, mentally. We really try to encourage like a whole family work balance. Summer internship programs, I will have to get back to you. I have to see on the site what the open period is. That's something that I may have to get back to Howard to. I'm not sure if it's open at the moment. What do TV shows get wrong? Okay, so we don't wear rain jackets everywhere we go. We don't show up somewhere and say the FBI is taking over. This is our scene. We're going to take over your case. That's a movie like Die Hard where they just show up and they take over. We don't have CSIs. That's not really, we have lab specialists, but we don't have people that do they go out and collect evidence and then they're out there arresting the people. So there's a lot of dramatization. And there was a show a few years back called Quantico, and it was, people would say, is it just like that? I said, oh, it's so much better. But I was joking, of course, because no one's taking sniper training on their, the first week. There's no pool in the academy where they're having happy hour next to it. It's nothing like that. Mostly stuff that, my wife, she gets on me when I say, oh, that's not really how they would do it, but I don't do it too often. Money laundering. There's a question, have you ever dealt with money laundering? Yes. Money laundering in here. So money laundering in the Netherlands, this is recognized as the Dutch government has admitted that they themselves are a narco state. And with a lot of I think last year they had 19,000 keys of cocaine came through the port of Rotterdam. And because of that, it's a good, so you have to pay for it and you have to move money in. So this is a hot spot. They have a very great infrastructure. They have world-class IT infrastructure, transportation, banking infrastructure. So this is a key hub for money laundering. And so we do a lot of money laundering operations with our undercover people. They need to pick up or move money for say like a drug cartel based in Colombia. They want to move 500,000 euros through here. We can help facilitate that with the Dutch police, and that becomes a chargeable offense. So we see a lot of money laundering over this way. And we do a lot of work with Bitcoin now, which is even more challenging. So we do it, but I don't enjoy it. But that's a newer skill. That's something. If you mastered that, you'd be in demand as well. How long does stage 1 and 2 process take? In my case, I cleared both in a year, and so I think that's about average, maybe a year and a half. It all depends on the federal government's hiring. The hiring needs. There's been years where there's been a government shutdown, or there's been a continuing resolution where the federal government can't get a budget decided, and that cascades all the way down through the federal government where we can't hire people. So some people have taken years after they cleared phase 2, and then they weren't interested anymore because they got married or they have a better job. So it could be at best 8 to 10 months. I don't see any shorter than that. A typical workday, it varies. It varies. In New York, it varied because the commute's so hard. The cost of living was so high that many people lived in Philadelphia and commuted to New York. So nobody was watching to see what time you got to work. Some people worked very hard, and some people kind of would skirt the rules a little bit, but they got their pound of flesh out of you, because just moving around the city, just getting from A to B is very hard and expensive. And then if you have an arrest, you might have to be up at 5 in the morning. or if you have to do a search, you could be out in a really nasty location for hours on end. You might be talking to people that you don't want to, but then you could also be talking to people it's totally enjoyable. So it's the beauty of this job is it's what you make of it. There's no real typical day. And I think my experience isn't representative of everybody else's. Here, it's a lot of liaison work. It's a lot of working with foreign police officers, trying to achieve what we want in the Netherlands and trying to take their requests and get them to meet their needs. If there's a homicide here in the Netherlands and there's Americans involved, we're trying to help bring charges against those Americans to kind of bring justice and closure. The intelligence analyst position, they've done a very good job in the last 18 years. The FBI used to be very weighted towards the agents. There was this old class warfare that, the agents that's what the FBI represented, and everybody else was subordinate to that. And they've gotten a better job of making the analysts peers. We have strategic analysts, we have tactical analysts. And so a lot of the way they interact with agents. So for my experience, I was a gang supervisor in Cincinnati. So I didn't know a lot about the gangs in that region. So I went to the analyst and said, hey, what products do you have on the gang, the state of the gangs in this region? And they were able to pull information from cases and sources and open source and other agencies and kind of give us a snapshot what the gang threat was. And every time agents did an interview or did an arrest or got a phone number or we got some information from the source, we passed it back to the analysts, and that helped them add to the scale of what we knew about the gangs. And they would come back and say, hey, here's something we're seeing in nearby cities. You should ask your sources this. So it gave the agents a chance to take questions that were researched by an analyst to a source. So it wasn't just agents going to a source saying, hey, anything new? No, I'm good. They would walk to them and say, look, here's some things we need to cover. So it's a very interactive process that's gotten better in the last few years. My major in college, I started off in engineering, but I didn't make it. So I ended up being a hydrogeologist. So I worked I got out of the Army for a year before I got in the FBI, and I worked for an environmental engineering firm. Military experience, it does give you an advantage. So you can get veterans preference. So they did have, so if you have, I don't know, I wouldn't wish to say anybody, but if you had a Purple Heart, that will guarantee you a phase 2 interview. We had a agent in my last office. He was wounded in Afghanistan, and he was able to get a phase 2 interview, but there is veterans preference. So that gives you additional points in your package when you do apply for during the application process. So it gives you what's called points. So theoretically you could move ahead of other people in the line, but if you don't have a personality or you're not what they're looking for, it doesn't really do you good, other than it does give you a better positioning within the hiring process. There's no stage 3. It's once you're after phase 2, after you've cleared the physical and the security background, you're given what's called a contingent job offer. And so in my case, I received this offer, and within a month I was at the academy. And the academy it's hard to describe if you don't know, but it is, you're in a dorm in a class of generally anywhere from 25 to 40 people. And it's a classroom environment, but then it's heavy on firearms training. So you get a lot of firearms training and tactical training. So it is pretty exciting. You get a lot of self-defense. It's a blend of all these things. They make it very, very intriguing. It's not boring, and it's not something even people that really never did a push-up in their life, by the end of it, they were able to pass the fitness test. There are, to take this one, so typical day of the FBI, there's certain divisions. So there are different divisions in the FBI. So we have counterterrorism, counterintelligence, criminal. We have a cyber division. So if you're a cyber agent, you're probably spending more time in the office working on different types of viruses and malware, intrusions, that type of thing, versus if you're a fugitive agent, you're out in the field a lot. If you're on a surveillance team, you're outside the office all the time. If you are on there's a couple offices in the FBI in New York, Washington, Miami, and Los Angeles. They are extraterritorial squads. So if something gets bombed in Europe, they're going to send you to Europe, and you could spend days or weeks there. You could go to Africa if you're in Washington or Middle East, or you could spend it. And if you don't want to do it, we work through people. We say, look, go for a week or two, come back, we'll replace you. Most people tend to be reasonable. They're not going to put you in a situation where you're gone all the time. Undergraduate major, but my grades are about a 3.2 GPA. I'm wondering if it's possible to still get an internship, and if you other know of intern opportunities. We don't really grant, Russian in itself is a very sought after language. Yeah, your grade point average, I'd have to see, I think that meets the threshold. If the intern opportunities tend to be just intern, we don't differentiate your intern time based on your skill. They're going to plug you in an FBI office and probably embed you with a squad. If you do get the internship program, they would possibly recognize your skill and try to put you on that squad. But most of our people that do Russian work are tested to see what to formally weigh or measure where they are within the language speaking. We call it the, I can't remember the name of the test, but they test it to see what your skill is. Cybersecurity being used in the FBI? Sure. So what we tend to do is, if there's been like Locker Gaga or there's been WannaCry, if you get these large scale intrusions that you see in the public with Home Depot or Sony, they get hacked. What we tend to do is we respond. We have response teams that will go out, work with companies and try to image servers and try to find out, okay, what was the point of entry? What was the type of program, or what software did they use to execute some kind of malware or on your network? And so that's the type of work when we respond, but we also check the security of our own networks, because we tend to use closed networks internally for most of our sensitive communication. So we don't tie into the internet, but we do have separate platforms that do. So I think cybersecurity, we have a lot of computer scientists. We've started hiring aggressively hiring a lot of computer scientists. Let's see here. Crime lab worker, that if you want to, we have the FBI lab. And so we have different units within the lab that hire. We have biologists, chemists, a lot of DNA, people that work on DNA profiles. So you would have to have a chemistry skill is very well sought after. So if you know anything about biochemistry or chemistry, that's something that is sought after. And so you would have to apply under one of those job backgrounds above. I think I had it. There was a different job category for a career path for science, technology, engineering, and math. That was one that you could go through that that job category to kind of put you in the channel if you were interested in something like the laboratory. I'm getting a little bit. Here's some. Sorry, I'm trying to cut down. So let me go back to some of the early ones. So what's the salary range from start to possible raises? So you're looking at, when I started, mid $50,000 to $60,000. So you have a base salary, and depending on where they send you, you get what's called a cost of living adjustment. So if you move to New York City, Houston, or San Francisco, you're going to get an addition to that salary that probably put you up into the $70,000, $80,000 range. Now, that may not be a very good benefit if you're in San Francisco, but it is a tremendous benefit if you're in Omaha or Kansas City. You might receive less of a cost of living adjustment, but you get steady raises as you go through. You start off as a GS10, 2 years later you're GS11, 2 years later you're GS12, and you get routine raises that aren't based on performance. So the FBI Academy, that is what location? Well, New York is a hard to fill office. Sad to say, New York and San Francisco are hard to staff because there's a lot of turnover. They're expensive. So people, if you're from Pennsylvania, you go to New York, you want to get out of New York. And so when you leave, they got to replace you with a new agent. So that tends to be the high turnover, and ones they always send a lot of people. Do most agents speak multiple foreign languages? Spanish is pretty common. I learned German from the FBI, but I would say maybe a third, but Spanish is a very, we have a lot of Spanish speaker. Favorite part of my job? my time in New York is, despite all the terrible things that happened, we were very close. Like with the task force officers from the NYPD, to this day, we still do reunions for 9/11. They are tremendous. And it's, we have a camaraderie that's going to last the rest of my life. Doing anything differently?
Can I just interject for 1 second, Craig?
Yep.
Make a video recommendation. If you want to learn more about the counterterrorism unit, especially the man who was in charge of it, John O'Neill, there's a really good video that you can probably find on YouTube called "The Man Who Knew," and it was made by PBS Frontline, and it's a 2-hour video about John O'Neill, and that's who Craig worked for. And unfortunately, John O'Neill quit the FBI a couple of days before 9/11 and was killed. He took a job as head of security at the World Trade Center and died in the attacks on 9/11.
Yeah. And Howard, if I don't know what your time constraints are, if like 9 o'clock, whatever I don't get to, I can just take a screen capture and write back to you. So I appreciate everybody's questions and interest.
You really don't have the time constraints, so if you want to go on for longer and answer them all, that's fine.
I'll go through and try to get as many. Yeah. I'd say looking differently back through the years, I think a 20-year career, usually 20 years is, if you're 37, you have to retire at 57. You can't stay longer. That's by law. So I came in young and I still have more time to go, but I think I've been a manager in the FBI, but I think what I'm going to try to do now is maybe go higher. I wish I would have started earlier, because my family is, I think after 20 some years, I have 3 teenage daughters now, they're tired of moving. And so it's getting to be where I might be trying to move on my own for a year, but and then that's not necessary. But if you do want to be promoted, you are going to have to move. My wife is not an FBI employee. She's from Tennessee. It pains her to this day that 2 of our children were born in New Jersey while I was assigned to New York. And she's always been wanting to go back to Tennessee. And so now I come home and I say, hey, here's a chance for a promotion. Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. And she'll tell me, no Los Angeles, no Las Vegas, let's stay East Coast and Southeast US. Say, okay, I understand. I won't bring anything crazy your way. The majority of agents are not hired internally. Most people do come, but that's not to say that you don't have a good inside shot if you're already working for the FBI, that we do hire people that can pass the fitness test and they meet all the requirements. So we do hire the vast majority of people, though, externally. Behavioral analysis unit, they're very specialized. And strategically, in most field offices, we have a limited number of resources. So we tend to look at whatever the largest threat is for that field office. So in most offices in the United States, one of the top threats is public corruption or drug trafficking or violent crime. And so those are the cases that we're going to tend to investigate. And so we kind of stay away from the cold case, old homicides, unless you have a serial killer or you have a very high profile terrorist that you have to interview and you need a profile on that person. You reach out to the behavioral analysis unit, and because they're so small, they can't take every case. You have to meet certain criteria. So it's this dance that you have to do. Like, it has to be a significant enough case in your own office before you approach them, and before they take it, you have to meet certain thresholds. Like, is this person, is he a serial murderer? What impact does this have on the community? Why are we expend these resources to this? Those are all questions and conversations you have to have. So when I said people with backgrounds in the healthcare industry, so when my previous office right outside Cincinnati, we had an agent, and she had worked for Blue Cross Blue Shield. And we had, at the time, during the heroin outbreak, we had a lot of physicians, not a lot, but we had some physicians that were abusing their prescription powers. We had doctors that were performing unnecessary medical procedures in the form of heart stents, unnecessary surgeries. We had a lot of kickbacks, and most of the cases tend to be some type of fraud where you upcode, or you get some procedure and you have the doctor will bill the insurance company for a higher cost procedure and take that money and share it. So I had no idea how to even penetrate that world. And she was an example of someone who had been an executive with Blue Cross Blue Shield that was very passionate about fighting healthcare fraud violations. So that's what I saw in my area. It tended to be the cardiologists that were performing unnecessary heart surgery operations to bring a lot of money to the region. And so that was a very significant threat that we saw in our area. Let's see. I did not, having prior firearms training doesn't really, they teach you that, so it's not really a requisite skill. I mean, I think I didn't have a lot of firearms experience, but some people do, but it's that they're looking for the whole. I mean, they can teach just about anybody to shoot because you'll do nothing but that, or at least for half your time while you're there. If you're not an agent, will they still move you around? Good question, because the intelligence analyst category is a relatively newer skill, and if you consider the FBI is over 100 years old, so we're over 112 years old now. The intelligence analysts were really only something that was added in the last 20 to 30 years of is a broad job category. And so in most field offices, if you're an intelligence analyst, you can stay there for your whole career, but your promotion opportunities are very limited unless you move to Washington. So you don't have to move, but if you don't move, you're not really going to be able to avail yourself to a lot of the promotion opportunities. What kind of FBI employees have to go through Quantico? That's just the agents. So just the agents have to, well, agents and analysts. So agents and analysts now go through Quantico. Even the staff operations specialists usually spend about 2 weeks there, but the agents go for 19 weeks, and I believe the intelligence analysts go for half that time. And now they have agents and analysts together in classes to kind of integrate the two job categories better. That was a way to kind of force, I think, better organizational integration with the intelligence and the agents. And so that's the intelligence analysts also go through Quantico. To the question for Danielle about the major in criminology and minor in psychology, I guess it's, I really am reluctant to steer people to things that I don't want them to do things they don't want to do because they think they need it for their agent application. Cybersecurity, if you have that gear and you're interested in it, that is one that's highly sought after. Languages aren't as, Russian, Chinese, those are always been there, but it's nice, but that's a big lift for if you're just changing the, you're just chasing the FBI job. But I would recommend adding to that skill set or getting that skill once you leave college. So, safety, I'm trying to think, like, there's been trials, but I've never had threats made against us. You do have an overt profile in that you are gonna, if you are an agent and generally on the criminal squad, you're gonna have to testify in court. That's publicly available information. Your names will be on indictments and even search warrant applications. So your name will be known unless you're an undercover agent. And in that case, they're gonna take you off that path just so you never have to, excuse me, to testify, just so you can protect your identity. But I've never had concerns, I think long concerns or anything about safety to my family.
Well, to yourself, I remember you telling the story about when you were investigating the bombings in Bali. You were glad that you had the German background, German language, because you present yourself instead of going around saying, "Hey, I'm FBI."
No, we would joke about that, like, "Oh, I'm Canadian." It's like we travel overseas. We've been asked to assist by that host nation. So when you go to a place like Afghanistan, you aren't walking around, you were under military escort the whole time, or you're with the military patrols. But in Africa, street crime was a huge concern. And in Nairobi, you were not able to just walk around by yourself. You had to be with another police officer from the Kenyan or Tanzanian service, because if I could be a mark for any kind of crime, just being not from Eastern Africa. Why is BAU so small, or at least a group of profiles? It's just a niche group. It's so if you think of the FBI, we have close to 40,000 employees. And of those, I think 15,000 are agents. And of those, you have these subsets of counterterrorism, counterintelligence, criminal. And so if you read the history of BAU, the Behavioral Analysis Unit, it came up, I'm sure that there's been playing Netflix specials on this type of thing about in the 70s, they realized that, hey, you see murders in Chicago and you think it's just in Chicago, but then in St. Louis, they're seeing the same type of profile on a serial killer. And no one's making the connections. This is a serial killer because they're just looking at homicides in their own jurisdiction. That was the first time that people came up and said, hey, we could probably study the behavioral patterns of this person to establish a better profile of who our subject likely is. And it takes a long time to train people. It's just one subset of the skills in the FBI, just like the lab. The lab is much bigger, and the lab does a lot of work when it comes to DNA profiles. We had a bomb unit that just take all the components from the devices from Afghanistan and Iraq and all the bombings throughout the world from Al-Qaeda committed to Ted Kaczynski, and they put all these devices back together again. And then based on the composition of those devices, they can work with the behavioral analysis unit to see, hey, what's the mindset of someone that, based on the components, so it works together. And then those two things feed the larger investigations of what's going on here. It's ultimately try to stop this and find out who's behind it. So I think that might be most of the questions.
All right, and perfect timing. I mean, you're efficient. You got this.
Well, I didn't want to go into too long segues. I'm trying to hit everybody's question. There's just so much there that I do welcome. If everyone wants to have a side discussion, just call me, because I need to get back to you on the internship questions, because I think my best advice is to call your local field office and just say, hey, because it might be different per office. And with this with the COVID-19, I'm not sure. I'm sure right now they're not taking any applications, but it's still worth trying to make the call, and I could help put you in touch with those people if you need it.
Great. And if I hope everybody's noticed, I put my email address along with the title for the video about John O'Neill, but I put my email address in the chat box. So if you want to look at that, it's hbs103@psu.edu. So if you send me an email, then I can forward your question to Craig and put you in touch with him, and I'm sure he'll answer, because he's done a great job here today answering all kinds of questions.
No, and like, again, I feel like don't ever discount your experience. Like if you just, I tell people, just don't have a criminal history behind you, or you just stay out of trouble. That's usually the first guiding principle, is don't get convicted of any crime. And if it's a misdemeanor, that's negotiable, but like anything greater than that. And we have people that were really having problems with opioids that and because you have to take a polygraph examination to get through. And that's the time when people have tried to trick it or work their way through it, and you'll never overcome that. If you lie, that is a dagger right there. If you lie on any of your any stage of the application process, and you're not truthful about that goes right to your integrity, and that will just kill you instantly when it comes to any kind of application.
And that will follow you through all law enforcement. So that's a question that they commonly ask. Have you ever been rejected because of false polygraph or lying on an application? So it's better to be honest, admit to something, talk to the folks. And this is a long application process. It's not a one-day process. So you have some time to talk to people about concerns you have. And I advise all my students to do that when they're applying for law enforcement jobs. And start keeping track of all of your roommates, all of your addresses. Start a file somewhere, because you don't realize in 5-10 years how many people you forget, and you're going to have to put down every address, every roommate that you've ever had. And I know I coached flag football, and I had to do that when I was 40-something years old. And I thought, you think you're going to remember your roommate from 25 years ago, and you're like, oh, what was that person's name? I can't remember. What was my address? So if you can start saving that information now, just put it in a Word file or someplace like that. It'll make the process go even quicker.
And thank you, everybody. Thanks for your patience. I hope everybody's like I said, hanging in there. Like we know that this, we have a lot of leadership discussions on how to navigate through this. And I mean, there'll be a lot of pain, but at the end, like we still look out for each other and like, we'll get through it. And so we'll start hiring again, and there'll be an FBI, and it's just, we need to staff it. So it's just, you have a chance just if you can get through this and get through college first, and then you have the discussion of what you want to do after.
Well, thank you, Craig. It's been fantastic. You have had by far the most questions of any of our speakers.
True or not yet.
So, I mean, you definitely got some people involved, and that's great. For everyone who's in attendance, thank you for coming. We will have those links for next week's discussions coming out. On Monday, we have a DEA agent speaking, and I believe these are all in the evening next week. DEA agent on Monday, Frank Marsh from the FBI Academy. He's not a special agent, but he's an instructor. He was an intelligence analyst before going to the Academy. He will be talking on Tuesday. And then we have a Virginia judge who was the attorney who argued the Atkins versus Virginia case, which before the Supreme Court, in which the Supreme Court said it's unconstitutional to execute someone who has intellectual disabilities. So a really varied discussion next week. And so I hope you'll join us. And again, one more time, thank you, Craig, for sharing your time with us. And we appreciate it. And if there's anything we can ever do for you, certainly ask. So,
right. No, thanks, guys. Yep. Thanks. Stay healthy, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.